My name is Buffy Myers. I'm 36 years old, and I gave my father's printing company 22 years of my life before he handed it to my little sister in front of the whole shop floor. His entire explanation was one sentence: she's just better with people. There was a cake, there was a banner. There were 11 employees staring at their shoes while my dad smiled like a man doing something generous. I packed my desk in 20 minutes, hung my keys on the nail by the door, and touched my grandfather's press on the way out. I didn't slam anything. A week later, their biggest client refused to renew. Then another one walked. By the end of the month, my parents were calling me. 3 voicemails in a single night. I just smiled and let it ring because what my family didn't understand yet, what would take them 8 months to understand, was that they hadn't given Sarah the company. They'd only given her the sign out front. And what they did to that sign is the part I need you to hear. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women stop holding everything up and families learn what silence costs. If you've ever done the work while somebody else took the bow, this story is yours. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back to before the cake. 5 in the morning, Mears Print and Graphics, Terre Haute, Indiana. I unlocked the side door the way I had since I was a teenager. Started the coffee and walked the floor. 6 jobs on the schedule board. I could tell you which press would give us trouble by the sound it made warming up. The way a mother knows a fake cough from a real one. I'd been doing some version of this since 2003 when I was 14, and my grandfather Earl paid me $5 a Saturday to sweep paper scraps and keep my opinions to myself. I managed the second part poorly. By 18, I was full-time. By 26, I ran the whole operation: scheduling, estimates, press checks, the vendor list, the freight, the panicked phone calls. When the hospital needed 30,000 patient folders in a week, they didn't call the office line. They called my cell. When the school district's programs came out crooked at a shop 2 counties over, somebody gave them my number, and we fixed it overnight. Here is the strange arithmetic of my life. Every big client we had could tell you my name, and my own business card couldn't. 22 years, and it never said anything under Buffy Mears. No title. Dad kept meaning to get to it. And yes, Buffy, I was named for my grandmother Beulah, who hated her own name enough to fix it for me. And I have heard every vampire joke you are currently thinking of. I stopped laughing around 1998. The jokes never bothered me, honestly, because in that building, my name meant something better than a title. It meant the work would be right. The public face of our family never came in before 9, but the whole town believed that shop ran on his smile. My dad, Walt Myers, is the best salesman I have ever watched work. That's not bitterness talking. It's a professional assessment. He remembers the name of every client's wife, every kid, every dog, and one legendary parakeet. He closes deals on the 9th hole that other printers couldn't close in a boardroom. He walks into the Chamber of Commerce breakfast, and the room tilts toward him like he's got his own gravity for 40 years. That was the division of labor in our family. Dad promised things to people over handshakes, and I went back to the shop and made those promises true. He'd swear we could turn a catalog in 6 days when the schedule said 9, and then he'd go home. I'd stay. Me and Dale Apprentice, our lead pressman, splitting a pizza at midnight, doing the impossible quietly so my father would still be a legend at breakfast. I want to be fair here because fair matters to me. Dad's charm wasn't fake. He loved those people. They loved him back. But somewhere along the way, he decided the love was the product. The ink was just what we wrapped it in. Every year or so, I'd bring up paperwork. My role, the future, what happens when he retires. Every year I got the same warm answer. We'll talk after tax season, kiddo. Tax season ended 22 times. The talk never came. And here's the detail I didn't tell people because it felt like tattling on my own father. In 40 years, Walt Mears never once ran a press. Not one. He couldn't load paper stock without creasing it. The man sold printing the way a travel agent sells Paris beautifully, sincerely, and without ever having to live there. None of that mattered right up until the day it was the only thing that mattered. My sister Sarah came home in 2023. She's 5 years younger than me, and I want to say this clearly because it's true. Sarah is talented. She spent 7 years at a marketing agency in Indianapolis doing brand work for restaurant chains, and she is genuinely good at it. She came back with a blazer the color of oat milk and a presentation called Myers 2.0. Dad watched that presentation the way some men watch fireworks. There were slides about brand story and visual identity, and a word cloud where the biggest word was authentic, which I found funny in a way I kept to myself. She had an audit for everything. The client experience audit was the one that got me, though it took me a month to notice what it did. Quietly, politely, my name came off the client emails. Requests that used to come straight to my cell started routing through a new address called Hello Merprint. Sarah called it streamlining the funnel. I called it what it was, but only in my own kitchen. Then one Tuesday, I found the new organizational chart taped to the break room wall, all clean lines and soft colors. Dad's box said founder. Sarah's box said brand director. Under them sat a gray rectangle labeled production. That was me, not my name. The word production, like the building, had grown me out of the floor. I stood there holding my coffee, and Dale came up behind me and looked at it for a while. He didn't say anything clever. He just tapped the gray box with one ink-stained finger and went back to his press. I took the chart down, folded it, and put it in my desk drawer. I told myself it was a draft. People make drafts. Looking back, it was a forecast. That winter, Dad turned 65 and started saying the word retirement out loud, testing it like a diving board. The whole shop assumed what I assumed. Dale assumed it. Rosa in Binder assumed it. Honestly, half of Terry Oat assumed it. I'd built relationships with those clients for 2 decades, and everybody knew who kept the trains running. Even my mother, Linda, would squeeze my shoulder at Sunday dinner and say things like, "Big year coming, sweetheart," which I banked like a promise. Nobody said Sarah's name. Sarah had been home 18 months. Meanwhile, the calendar had teeth in it. Our contract with Hartwell Regional Medical Center, the biggest client we had, $21,000 a year, 18 years running, came up for renewal in April. I'd already started the prep binder because that's what I do. And in Dad's office, above the filing cabinet, hung the photograph that explains my entire family, though I didn't fully understand it yet. It's 1987. Dad is 27, standing in front of Terry Oat First National in a borrowed tie, grinning like a game show host. That was the day the bank almost called the loan on my grandfather's shop. And Walt, young, broke, and charming, talked a branch manager into an extension that saved everything. Every Myers child was raised on that story the way other kids get raised on Bible verses. The smile that saved the shop. Dad would point at that photo with his coffee cup and say, "That's the day I learned what this business really sells." My grandfather never commented on it. Not once that I heard, and Earl lived until 2011. My father believed that photograph was the day he saved the family. He never told anybody the rest of the story. I had to wait almost 40 years until the whole thing was on fire to hear it. Now, before you ask why a grown woman spent 22 years without a contract, let me tell you what I actually did. Because I did not sit quietly and hope. In 2015, when I took over operations, I asked Dad to put succession in writing. He agreed enthusiastically, the way he agreed to everything, and made an appointment with Gary Whitlock, the family attorney. Then he canned it. After tax season in 2019, I got serious. A commercial printer in Indianapolis offered me an operations job. Real salary, real title, and I said yes in my head for 2 full days. That same week, Dad went into the ER with chest pain, and by Friday, he had a stent and a list of instructions he ignored. You try handing a resignation letter to a man with a fresh stent in his chest and a shop he can't run without you. I stayed. Then 2020 came, and if you owned a small business that year, you already know. I did the payroll protection paperwork at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning, kept all 11 people employed and steered us through while Dad called clients to keep spirits up, which, to be fair, he was good at. Every exit had closed on its own schedule, none of them mine. Here's the one piece of protection I did have, though I didn't know yet it would matter. In all those years, nobody ever asked me to sign an employment agreement. No contract, no non-compete, nothing. We're family, Dad always said, and family doesn't do paperwork. He meant it as warmth. It turns out that sentence cuts in both directions, and he'd only ever read it in one. So when Dad finally called a meeting last April, my first thought was that Whitlock must have drafted the papers at last. There was no attorney at that meeting. There was a cake. Friday, April 11th, 2025, 11:45 in the morning. Dad called everyone onto the main floor between the presses, and I noticed the details in the wrong order. First, the cake, sheet cake, white frosting, blue letters, then the banner printed on our own wide format machine, which somebody had to have run the night before without me knowing, and that alone should have told me everything. Next chapter. Then Sarah's blazer. Then my mother standing slightly behind Dad with her hands folded like she was at a funeral for someone she didn't know well. Dad gave a speech about 56 years of Myers Inc., about his father Earl, about family. He got misty at all his usual mile markers, and then he said it cheerful as a weather report. So starting June 1st, I'm handing the keys to Sarah. She's going to take this place into the future. The room did a thing I will never forget. Every single head turned toward me. Not toward Sarah, toward me. Dale's jaw went somewhere south of his collar. Rosa actually said, "Wait," out loud. I stood very still, and I asked the only question that mattered in the calmest voice I owned. Who's running operations? And my father, in front of 11 employees, in front of my mother, in front of my grandfather's H. Heidelberg press, waved his hand like he was brushing a crumb off the day and said, "Oh, we'll figure all that out. Sarah's the right fit. She's just better with people. She's just better with people." There it was, 22 years of 2 a.m. press runs, weighed against a word cloud, and the word cloud won. Sarah at least had the grace to look at the floor. Then she recovered, stepped forward, all sunshine, and announced her first initiative, a full rebrand, new logo, new colors, new name because, and I quote, "My print and graphics sounds a little dusty." My mother laughed one nervous note too loud. Somebody cut the cake. I stood in the middle of my life's work while people ate frosting off paper plates, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet, like a press powering down. I didn't yell. I want that on the record because Sarah's version of the story used to include the word stormed, and there was no storm. I walked to my desk while they were still eating cake, and I packed it in 20 minutes. One cardboard box, my mug, my sweater, a photo of Earl at the 1974 open house, and the fountain pen he left me when he died. I left every client file, every vendor list, every password printed and labeled in the top drawer because that's the difference between leaving and burning something down, and I needed that difference to be visible. Then I walked to the side door and hung my keyring on the nail. All of it, including the little brass key to the press room I'd carried since I was 16. On the way out, I stopped at the H. Heidelberg, my grandfather's press, bought in 1974, older than me, and still truer than most people. I put my hand flat on the frame for a second. Just a second. My mother caught me in the parking lot with her "don't make a scene" face already assembled and said, "Buffy, don't make a scene." I looked at her, my box on my hip, and said, "I'm not making a scene, Mom. I'm making an exit." And I drove home to my own little house on Maple Avenue and sat in the quiet. 7 days. That's all gravity needed. Now, before I tell you what the hospital did that Friday, I want to know something. If you have ever trained your whole life for a seat at a table and watched it handed to somebody with a nicer slideshow, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I read every one of them. And stay close because my family was still eating cake, and the first invoice of consequence was already in the mail. The first Monday of my unemployment, I woke at 5 out of pure habit and lay there listening to a house with no schedule in it. 22 years, and I had never once been home on a weekday. At 7 a.m., I learned my own kitchen gets nice light. I learned my neighbor walks a corgi in a raincoat. The corgi, not the neighbor. And I learned that my phone did not care that I'd left because the calls kept coming, just not from my family. Wednesday morning, it was Janet from Hartwell Regional, their print coordinator, sounding carefully casual. Buffy. Hey, the patient intake folders, the big spring run, press check's supposed to be Thursday. Nobody's confirmed. Here is where I made the decision that shaped everything after, though it felt small at the time. I did not sigh. I did not editorialize. I said, I don't work there anymore, Janet. Sarah runs it now. Call the office. They'll take care of you. That was the whole speech. You should understand. I could have emptied both barrels into my family's reputation right there, and part of me wanted to, the part that had watched them eat cake. But I decided something driving home with that cardboard box. Whatever happened next, it was going to happen without one dishonest word from me. Not for their sake, for mine. There was a silence on the line, maybe 3 seconds, the kind where you can hear a person recalculating. Then Janet said quieter, like she was asking about a diagnosis. Buffy, does the office know how to finish it? I looked out my window at the corgi in the raincoat, and I told her the only true thing I had. I guess we're all going to find out. The Hartwell renewal meeting happened Friday, April 18th, 1 week to the day after the cake. I wasn't there, obviously. I got it from Dale, who called me that night from his garage, talking low like a man reporting from behind enemy lines. Sarah had walked into a hospital procurement meeting with a slide deck, not a production schedule, a deck, brand refresh, engagement metrics, a new logo reveal with the sunrise colors. Carl Hutchkins sat through it. Carl is Hartwell's purchasing director, 61 years old, a man who buys $3 million of goods and services a year and has the poker face of a filing cabinet. When the slides ended, Carl asked his questions. Who confirms turnaround on the intake folders? What's the backup plan when a press goes down mid-un? Who do I call at 10 p.m. when the proof's wrong? And my sister, my smart, polished, genuinely talented sister, answered every one of them with some version of "we're building an exciting new team structure," which is a beautiful sentence that means nobody. Carl closed his folder, thanked them for 18 good years, and said Hartwell would be going out to bid. $21,000 a year gone before the coffee got cold. Dad's response per Dale was to clap Sarah on the shoulder and call it a transition bump. A bump 18 years. Here's the thing I understood that night, sitting on my porch with the phone against my ear, that my father had never understood in his life. That contract was never between Hartwell and Myers Print and Graphics. It was between Carl Hutchkins and the person who always picked up at 10 at night. They hadn't lost a client. They'd lost the person the client meant. Then came Millhouse Markets. Millhouse is a grocery chain, 9 stores across 2 counties, and for 11 years, we'd printed their weekly circular. The flyer with the meat specials that lands in 60,000 mailboxes every Wednesday. It is not glamorous. It is exact work. Prices change Tuesday night. We proof against the master sheet. A human being initials every page and only then does it print. That proofing step was mine. And when I left, it apparently left with me because Sarah had flagged the checklist system as, this is the actual phrase from her process audit, a legacy bottleneck. The last week of April, the circular went out with the old prices on the front page. Ground beef, boneless chicken, laundry soap, all wrong, some by a lot. 9 stores had to honor misprinted prices at the register, while assistant managers taped corrections over the displays. Millhouse billed the shop for the difference and pulled the contract by Friday. $14,000 a year gone in one bad Wednesday. And this is the part that told me exactly how it was all going to go. Sarah's response was a statement. A statement on the shop's brand new Instagram sunrise logo and everything. As we evolve, we're streamlining our partnerships to align with our vision. I read that sentence maybe 10 times. In the front office, evolve means growth. Back in the press room, evolve means somebody's hours just got cut and everybody back there knew it. Dale told me the floor went quiet for a whole shift. 2 clients in 2 weeks, the 2 biggest lines in the ledger. I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and figured what was left holding up payroll. The math had a hole in it you could drive a truck through. April 30th, Wednesday night. I was making soup when the phone lit up, and I watched it ring from across the counter like it was somebody else's problem, which technically it now was. Voicemail 1. My mother, gentle and rehearsed. Sweetheart, things are a little chaotic at the shop and we think this has all been blown out of proportion. Call us. Voicemail 2. An hour later, Dad skipping past. Hello, Buffy. The Hartwell thing is a misunderstanding. Carl's always been dramatic, but the timing's bad with the Millhouse situation, so we need you to come straighten out the production side for a while. Call me tonight. And voicemail 3. Dad again, near 10. The salesman's polish finally cracked at the corner. This is about family, Buffy. The shop's in a rough patch and you're sitting home. Whatever this is, be the bigger person. I stood there stirring soup, and I took inventory of everything those 3 messages did not contain. An apology, my old job, any job, a single sentence acknowledging what happened on that shop floor in front of 11 people. They weren't calling their daughter. They were calling a part that had fallen off the machine, and they wanted it bolted back on before anyone important noticed the rattle. The clients are being dramatic. Carl Hutchkins hadn't raised his voice in the 18 years I'd known him. So no, I didn't call back. I sat at my kitchen table, ate my soup, and I'll just tell you the truth because you've come this far with me. I smiled alone in my kitchen, one slow smile. My family took my silence for a sulk. It wasn't a sulk. It was a blueprint. And I'd started drawing it that afternoon. My mother is a woman who believes there is no wound a pot roast cannot close. So the first Sunday in May, I was summoned to lunch. I went. You may ask why, and the honest answer is that 36 years of loving people doesn't shut off because they broke your heart on a Friday. The table was set with the good dishes which in my family signals negotiation. Dad opened with charm, told a story about the parakeet client got his laugh from Mom. Then came the offer served between the roast and the pie. And I want you to hear the actual shape of it. I could help out from home quietly. No title, no announcement, just until Sarah finds her rhythm. I would fix the production chaos from my kitchen table invisibly while the town kept believing in the Sunrise logo. They were offering me my old life back minus the parts where anyone knew it was mine. I said no softly, no speeches. That won't work for me. And my mother's face did the thing where disappointment gets dressed up as concern. And then Sarah, who had been quiet, leaned in and said the line that told me she truly did not understand it as an insult. Buffy, come on. I'm better with people. You're better with machines. That's literally all Dad meant. I looked at my little sister for a long moment. She believed it. That was the sad, fascinating center of it. She'd been raised on that photograph in Dad's office, same as me, and she'd come out believing the frame was the whole house. The machines, I said, standing up, finding my purse, have never once lied to me, Sarah. Thanks for lunch. Nobody followed me out, which was its own kind of information. Mid-May, Sarah threw the launch party, Solstice Print Co. That was the new name, chosen per the invitation to reflect light, warmth, and new beginnings. The invitation was gorgeous. She really is good at invitations. I was not on the guest list, which spared everyone the trouble of watching me decline. But the shop sits on my way home from the hardware store. And that Thursday night, I drove past slow, the way you drive past an old house you used to live in. String lights in the parking lot, plastic champagne flutes, a projector throwing the Sunrise logo against the brick where it looked, if I'm honest, pretty. And then my headlights swept the dumpster by the loading dock, and I hit the brakes hard enough to slide the groceries off the seat, because sticking up out of that dumpster on top of the dead banners and the bubble wrap was the sign. The sign, 6 feet of Oak Myers printing in gold letters, hand-painted by my grandfather in 1969, when the whole shop was one press and a prayer. It hung over that door for 56 years. Earl repainted the gold himself every spring until his hands got too unsteady. And then Dale and I did it every April without ever being asked. They'd unbolted it and thrown it in the trash with the packing peanuts. I stood in that parking lot in the dark, party lights glowing around the corner, and I climbed into a dumpster in my good jeans. The sign was heavier than I remembered. I hauled it out one end at a time, scraped my forearm, got dirt all down my shirt, and loaded it into the bed of my truck like a casualty. My father gave Sarah the company. Fine. But that night, in the trash, they left the only thing I still wanted. I laid the sign across 2 sawhorses in my garage and cleaned it with a soft rag, the way you'd clean a picture frame after a flood. Under the grime, the gold still held. Earl used sign enamel from a company that doesn't exist anymore, and he laid those letters down with a steadiness I have chased my whole life and never quite caught. I sat on an overturned bucket and let myself remember him properly for the first time since the cake. My grandfather could not talk to bankers. He got shy around loud men and he mumbled at parties. And the town's polite consensus was that Earl Myers was a fine craftsman with no head for business. But I watched him run that shop from the time I was 14 until he died in 2011. And here's what I saw. He never missed a delivery date. Never. Weather, breakdowns, flu. The job arrived when Earl said it would arrive for 42 years. And that reliability bought more loyalty than any handshake my father ever sold. Once, when I was maybe 16, I asked him why he'd stayed all night nursing a run for a client who haggled him down on price every single year. He didn't even look up from the feeder. "You can't print a promise, kid," he said. "You have to keep it." Then he handed me the loop and made me check the registration, because for Earl there was no lesson without a job attached. I sat in my garage looking at his letters, and then I went inside and opened the folder where I keep my life. $43,000 in savings, a paid-off truck, a small house with a big garage, and I opened my laptop and started searching for something. I wasn't ready to say what, not even to myself. The last week of May, Solstice laid off Dale Apprentice, 31 years at that shop. Dale ran his first press for my grandfather in 1994, trained me on impositions when I was a teenager with more attitude than sense, and has personally saved every important job we ever nearly lost. The termination paperwork, he read it to me over the phone from his truck in the parking lot in the flattest voice I've ever heard from him, cited ongoing quality failures with the Millhouse misprint listed as the example. The proofing checklist Sarah deleted as a legacy bottleneck. Its failure was now officially Dale's fault. They walked him out before lunch. He's 58. His wife has the good insurance, thank God. But that's not the point. And you know it's not the point. The point is he called me from that parking lot and he was not okay, and he spent the first minute pretending to be okay, which was worse. Rosa texted me an hour later they're saying more cuts after summer. Who's next? I sat with that because until that afternoon I'd been telling myself a comfortable story that this was between me and my family, and the honorable thing was to stand clear and let them learn. But a shop isn't a family argument. It's 11 paychecks. It's Dale's 31 years being rewritten into a firing offense to protect a brand story. Standing clear stopped being neutral the moment they started feeding my people into the hole I left. So when Dale ran out of ways to say he was fine, I asked him the question I'd been circling for 2 weeks in my garage with the sign on the sawhorses listening. I said, "Dale, hypothetically, if I did something stupid, would you do it with me?" And Dale, God bless him, didn't even ask what. He just said, "So when do we start?" My mother showed up at my house the first week of June with a shoebox of old photographs, which is how women of her generation say the things they can't say. We drank coffee at my kitchen table while she worked up to it. Then she slid out a smaller print of the 1987 photo. Dad in the borrowed tie, grinning outside the bank. And she told me the part of the story that never made it into the legend. The night before that photograph, she said, Earl had gotten the call that the loan was being called in, and my grandfather, the steadiest man I ever knew, knelt down on the press room floor in front of the H. Heidelberg and prayed out loud. Walt, 27, standing in the doorway, watched his father beg God next to a machine, and something in him broke and reset crooked. "Your dad walked into that bank the next morning," Mom said. "And he was wonderful, and he saved us all, and he came home certain of exactly one thing. His father's hands almost lost the shop, and his smile saved it. He spent his whole life certain of it. Buffy, he didn't pick Sarah to hurt you. He picked the thing that saved him. He looked at you, and he saw his daddy on that floor. I sat with my coffee going cold. It's a strange thing, understanding a person completely and being no less angry. The two just sit side by side, not touching. Then my mother did the bravest thing she's done in this whole story. She looked at her hands and said, "He told me his decision in March. I knew before the cake was ordered." She let that sit. She didn't ask to be forgiven for it. I refilled her coffee, and we looked at photographs of dead people until dark. And when she left, neither of us had said the word solstice out loud. The building I'd been circling online was Hoffman's Hardware on Wabash Avenue downtown. Closed 3 years, dusty windows, a fist sign faded to the color of weak tea. I met the landlord on a Tuesday. Inside, it smelled like sawdust in 1975, and it was perfect. High ceilings, a freight door in back, and 3-phase power still wired from the machine tool days, which, if you're not a shop person, is the difference between running real presses and running a hobby. $14.50 a month. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and did the honest math. $43,000 in savings, a used digital press, a cutter, a folder, call it $62,000, borrowed against a small business equipment loan. Dale part-time until revenue said otherwise, Rosa, when she was ready to jump. Then at the bottom of the pad, I wrote the rules because if I was doing this, I was doing it in a way Earl could look at. Rule: I would never call a Solstice client. Not one call, not one nudge, not one just checking in. Whoever came on their own feet. Rule: not one bad word about my family in public ever. The town wouldn't get a feud out of me. Rule: everything in daylight, my name on the lease, my name on the loan, my sign over the door. If I was going to be visible, I'd be visible all the way. I looked at those rules a long time. Then I signed my name twice that week. Once on a lease, once on a loan I could not afford to be wrong about. If part of you is standing in that empty hardware store right now doing math you can't afford to get wrong, type daylight in the comments and subscribe, because my family was about to learn the difference between a brand and a name. The lease and the loan were signed by the middle of June, and then I did the thing there was no walking back from. I drove to the county building and registered the business name. Myers Printing Company, my name, my grandfather's name, the name my sister had officially retired to a dumpster 4 weeks earlier. The clerk read the form, looked up at me over her glasses and said, "Any relation to the print shop?" And I said, "I'm the relation." And she stamped it. Word crossed town before I got home. Terre Haute is a big small town, and news of a Myers opening a print shop against the Myers print shop was better than anything on television. Dad called that evening. "No. Hello. You're using our name." His voice had a pitch I'd never heard in it. And I realized, holding the phone away from my ear, that I was listening to my father lose a negotiation for the first time in my life. "You're doing this to punish me. You're taking the family name to hurt this family." I waited until he stopped. Then I said the sentence I'd rehearsed exactly 0 times, which is how I know it was true. "It's my name too, Dad. You threw it away." I went and picked it up. It was in the dumpster next to the bubble wrap. Silence on the line. A long one. When he spoke again, he'd found the salesman voice, told me lawyers would have opinions about this, and hung up before I could answer, which was a mercy because I didn't have an answer bigger than the one I'd already given. The letter from Solstice's attorney arrived 9 days later on very good paper. I read it twice at my kitchen table, and then I'm not proud of this, but you deserve the truth. I laughed because I'd spent 22 years around trademarks and trade names, and whoever wrote that letter was about to have a very awkward phone call with their client. The awkward phone call happened, I assume, because the letter died quietly. Here's why. In one breath, you cannot rebrand away a name, announce to the newspaper that the old name no longer reflects who we are, throw its sign in the garbage, and then claim you still own it. And I wasn't trading on their brand anyway. I was using my own legal surname on a business I owned outright in an industry my family stopped wanting the moment it needed actual ink. Their attorney knew all that better than I did. So, while that letter deflated, we built. June and July were sweat and secondhand steel. Dale and I trucked in a used digital press from a closing shop in Evansville, rebuilt a cutter older than Rosa, and scrubbed 50 years of hardware store dust out of every corner of that building. Rosa jumped in August, walked in on a Tuesday with her toolbox, and said Solstice had cut binder to 3 days a week, so she'd like full-time in dental. Thank you. Opening day was Monday, August 4th. No launch party, no string lights. I unlocked the front door at 7 a.m., turned the hand-lettered open sign, and started on our first paying work. Sunday bulletins for 2 churches and the funeral programs for Hendrick's mortuary. The humblest printing there is, and the least forgiving, because a funeral does not reschedule for a paper jam. We delivered clean and on time. Then we did it again and again, and the phone began to ring on its own. I want one fact perfectly clear, because it is the spine of everything that happened after. I never made a single call. Not to Hartwell, not to Millhouse, not to any client I'd ever served under my father's roof. They found the shop through the chamber directory, the paper, and the oldest technology in Indiana. People talking. And in the last week of August, a white SUV with a hospital seal on the door parked outside my window. Carl Hutchkins walked into my shop holding a folder, looked around at the exposed brick and the second-hand press like a man appraising a horse, and said, "Nice bones." Then he put the folder on my counter. Our new vendor out of Indianapolis missed a delivery Tuesday. Patient intake folders. I need 3,072 hours, 0 errors. I'm told that's impossible on your equipment. I opened the folder. Same spec I'd written myself once upon a time. I recognized my own margins like handwriting. "It's not impossible," I said. "It's just unpleasant." Carl almost smiled. "Price it fair. This is a trial, Buffy, not a favor." I priced it fair. And then the 3 of us, Dale, Rosa, me, ran that job like a field hospital. We staged the stock Thursday night, ran plates and shifts, and when the folder machine jammed at 1 in the morning, Rosa and I hand-fed the last 400 like we were dealing cards. We delivered Saturday, 4 hours early. I carried the boxes in myself. Carl checked 10 folders at random, initialed the sheet, and then stood there a moment with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at me the way he looks at a speck, carefully all the way through. "You know what Walt used to tell people about you? He said that you were better with machines. I bought from that shop for 18 years. He tapped the counter once like a gavel. You were the people we dealt with, Buffy. You. The rest of it was lunch." He signed a 6-month trial contract the following week. After his SUV pulled away, I walked out to my truck in the alley, sat behind the wheel, and gripped it until my hand stopped shaking. 5 minutes, maybe. Then I went back in and cut paper because the funeral programs were due, and grief keeps a tighter schedule than vindication. That same night, Dale heard from his old crew. Solstice had just landed one big job to study the ship, the school district's fall awards night. Here's what happened with the awards programs, and I'd like the record to show I took no joy in it. Almost none. The VO County School District's Fall Awards Night is the kind of event grandmothers frame programs from. 500 printed programs, every honor student's name in them. Solstice ran the job in October, delivered on schedule for once, and nobody caught the error until a district secretary read the cover on a Monday afternoon. The date was wrong. The event was Thursday. The program said the wrong night. Send 500 grandmothers to an empty gym. Wrong. Marjorie Fenn, the district's coordinator, called every printer in the county at 7 that evening, and my phone rang 4th or 5th. She told me so, and I respected her for it. "I have 3 days, Buffy. Can you save this?" Now I knew whose mistake it was. She knew. I knew. The whole county was one raised eyebrow, which is exactly why I did it absolutely straight. I quoted her our standard rush rate, same as I'd quote a stranger. No discount to make a point, no premium to make a different point. Fair is fair in both directions. You can't print a promise, you have to keep it, and I wasn't about to keep mine crooked. We had proofs to her by 9 the next morning. She initialed the date herself twice at my request and laughed while she did it, and finished programs in her office in 48 hours. Awards night went off perfectly. 500 grandmothers framed their programs, none the wiser. Marjorie called in November to move the district's whole annual contract to us, effective with the new budget year. And 1 week after that call, Dale's old crew passed along the news I'd been dreading on their behalf. The news that meant it was no longer a story about my feelings. For the first time in 56 years, the shop my grandfather built missed payroll. The payroll news hit November 7th, and the town knew by the 8th because paychecks talk. The Tribune-Star ran a small business feature that same week. I didn't seek it out. The reporter's aunt got her funeral programs from us, which is how news actually works, with a photo of me at the H. Heidelberg's future spot, and the headline, "The Mayor's name is back." I read it with my coffee and felt the strangest mix, proud and sick for people I loved. Sarah came in the day after it ran. Not a scene. My sister doesn't do scenes. She does entrances. But this entrance was different. Coat buttoned wrong. Mascara worn down to a suggestion, holding the folded newspaper like evidence. "You're stealing my life," she said quietly. That's what made it land. Not the words, the exhaustion. I set down the box cutter and gave her the only defense I had, which had the advantage of being true. "I never made a single call, Sarah. Not one. You can pull the phone records." She looked around my little shop. Brick, steel. The smell of ink her rebrand had vanished from her own building. And I watched something move behind her face. When she finally spoke, it wasn't a weapon. It was the truest thing my sister ever said to me. "Dad never taught me the machines. Did you know that? Not once. Every time I asked about the shop growing up, he'd wave me off and tell me I was the face. I built a whole life out of being the face." She caught herself, then straightened her coat, found the exits in her voice. At the door, she turned around. "This isn't over. The bank's giving us options." It didn't sound like a threat, really. It sounded like a girl repeating what her father told her one more time. I said, "Okay, Sarah." And she left. And I stood in my shop, understanding finally that my sister and I had grown up in the same photograph. She just never got to leave the frame. The first snow came the second week of December, the soft kind that makes even a parking lot look forgiving. We'd had a good, brutal month, the district onboarding, Hartwell's trial volume Christmas letter press cards that half the county suddenly wanted. And I was closing alone on a Thursday, lights half down, cash drawer counted. The old sign lay on the back work table under a drop cloth where I'd been restoring it on slow evenings, letter by letter, with enamel I had to order from a specialty house in Ohio. Gold leaf dust on my sleeves. I almost didn't see him. My father stood outside the front window in the snow, hat on, no gloves, looking in at the shop the way you'd look into an aquarium, close to it, and completely unable to breathe in it. I don't know how long he'd been there. I unlocked the door. He stamped the snow off on the mat like any customer, which undid me a little, and then he stood in the middle of my floor and turned in a slow circle. The press, the cutter, the brick, the coffee cans of brushes, and the worked-in back where Meyer's printing lay half bright under the drop cloth. He looked at that the longest. Then my father, Walt Mears, the best salesman I have ever watched work, sat down on the stool at my counter with the stiffness of a man twice his age, took off his hat, and sat it down beside him. "You got a minute for me, Buffy?" he said. I said, "I did." I turned the coffee back on, and while I had my back to him, I heard it. A small metal sound on wood. The exact sound a keyring makes when a man sets down everything it opens. When I turned around, the keys to my grandfather's shop were sitting on my counter, and my father slid them across it toward me. He laid it all out over that coffee, and I'll give him this. It was the best pitch of his life, because it was made of things I had actually wanted. Come back. Take the company, all of it. Ownership papers signed at Whitlock's office within the week. "It was always supposed to be yours," he said, and his voice cracked on always. And I believe he believed it. The bank would extend the line of credit if I was at the helm. He'd already asked, which told me how far ahead of me he'd planned this conversation. Sarah would stay on as creative director. She needs a soft landing. Buffy, she's your sister. My shop, this shop, would fold in, and then the last term delivered gently like it was a gift. We'll tell people it was the plan all along. Transition of leadership. Nobody has to be embarrassed. No feud, no gossip. The family comes out of this looking strong. There it was. The old currency one more time. The story first, the truth, wherever it fit. I looked at the keys on my counter. 10 years I had asked that man for one page of paper with my name on it. 10 years of tax seasons. Now he'd sign anything I wanted by Friday. As long as the town never learned the true order of events, my want. Gift wrapped in the one condition that had been strangling me my entire life. I didn't trust myself to answer that night, and I told him so plainly. I need one night, Dad. He nodded, stood, put his hat on, and paused at my door. Take the keys home at least, he said. Walk the floor. It remembers you. So I did. God help me. I took the keys. I let myself into my grandfather's shop at 10 that night, alone, and stood in the dark breathing it. Every shop has its own smell. This one was ink and machine oil and half a century of paper dust underneath the ghost of Sarah's lavender diffusers, which had fought the ink for a year and a half and lost. I didn't turn on the main lights. I walked the floor by the glow of the exit signs past presses sitting quiet under their covers like horses in stalls, and I ended up where I always end up at the H. Heidelberg. Someone had draped it in plastic sheeting. I pulled the sheeting off. It deserved better. And put my hand flat on the frame the way I had the day I walked out. Cold. It had never once been cold in my whole life. That machine ran warm from Monday to Saturday for 50 years. In the doorway to the stockroom, I found the pencil marks. Faint now. Buffy, age 14, and a line. Age 15, a line. Age 16, taller. Earl measured me against that doorframe every summer like I was a crop coming in. This building was every hour of my youth, and it could be mine before Friday. All I had to do was nod. And the whole drive home, one sentence rode shotgun and would not get out of the truck. We'll tell people it was the plan all along. If I nodded, that sentence became the truth of my life. The town would get a smooth story. Sarah would get a soft landing. Dad would get a legacy with no dent in it. And the woman in the dumpster in her good jeans. She'd never officially have existed at all. I sat in my driveway a long time. Then I went in, slept badly, and at 7 in the morning, I called my father and said, "Come to my shop at closing time." He came at 6 in the same hat, and the snow was doing its soft, forgiving thing again outside my windows. I'd closed early. I had the coffee on, and the two of us sat at my counter like a customer and a printer, which in the end is what we were. I set his keyring between us. Then I pushed it back across the wood, and the sound it made, small, metal, final, was the loudest thing that happened all night. "No, Dad." He looked at the keys, then at me, and I watched 40 years of closing technique assemble behind his eyes, and I held up my hand before any of it could deploy. "You're not going to talk me around this, so save us both the good stories. Here's my answer, and here's exactly why. If I take that company back in the dark with a cover story about how it was the plan all along, then everything you believe is true. The story beats the work. The face beats the hands. Every hour I stood at those presses becomes something we don't mention forever, so the family can look strong at the chamber breakfast. I spent 22 years being your quiet miracle dad. I'm not signing up for a lifetime term." He started to say my name, and I finished the rest gently because gentleness was all I had left, and he was still my father. "You told everyone Sarah's better with people. Dad, look at me. I'm not better with people. I just never lied to them." My father sat there, and I watched the salesman leave his body. The shoulders first, then the jaw, then the eyes, until what remained was an old man in a wool coat on a printer's stool, unhandled, out of stories. When he finally spoke, his voice had gravel in it I'd never heard. So you'd really watch it die? Your grandfather's shop? And I said the truest thing I've ever said out loud. No, Dad. I watched it die in April. You were there. There was cake. He flinched and I put my hand over his and I gave him the only deal I had. Here's what I will do in daylight on paper. I'll hire the crew. Roz is already mine. And I'll take the others the day they walk in. If it comes to liquidation, I'll be at that auction bidding fair market like anybody else. My money, my name on the check. And you and I from tonight, we tell each other the truth, or we tell each other nothing. That's the whole offer. It doesn't get better. And it never expires. He picked his keys up off my counter like they weighed 40 palmas. At my door, he stopped back still to me and said, "Your mother said you'd say no." Then he was out in the snow. 3 weeks later, they taped the auction notice to the door my grandfather painted. Solstice Print Company announced its closing the second week of January in a final Instagram post about New Horizons that got 11 likes. 56 years ended in a font called Brandon Grotesque. The town talked about it for exactly 1 week, hard wall-to-wall casserole-grade talk, and then moved on to the county road budget, because that's what towns do, and there's a mercy in it. My mother did not move on. She came to my house the night the notice went up, sat in my kitchen where all the true things in this family apparently happen, and cried the way careful women cry, almost silently, with her rings clicking against the mug. And then Linda Myers said the sentence my father still couldn't lift. "We were wrong, Buffy, not just about the company, about what you were to it." I didn't answer right away because some sentences you have to let finish landing. Sarah didn't call. She sent one text from Columbus where a consulting firm had, this is true, and I find it almost elegant, recruited her off the strength of the Solstice launch materials themselves. The work was genuinely that good, just built on nothing. Her text said, "The sign was my call. I'm sorry for that one. Not for all of it. For that one." It was the most honest square inch of my sister I'd ever been handed. And I wrote back, "I know. I have it." I hired Rose's 2 friends from Binderi the day they walked in, like I'd promised. And on the last Friday of January, the auction company stapled its yellow listing sheets by the old loading dock. Saturday, February 21st, 10 in the morning. Lot number 7, H. Heidelberg Press, 1974. The auction was held in the cold shop with the big doors rolled open, which felt indecent, like holding an estate sale inside the casket. Dealers from 3 states stamped their feet on my grandfather's floor and breathed white and drank gas station coffee over the machines. I came with one number in my head and Earl's fountain pen in my coat pocket. Dale came too and stood beside me with his arms crossed like a bodyguard for a machine. My father stood at the back near the stockroom door, under the pencil marks he probably didn't know were there, hat in his hands. He didn't work the room. I'd never in my life seen Walt Mears stand anywhere without working the room. The auctioneer moved through the cutters, the digital equipment, the pallet racks. Quick, bloodless business. And then they came to Lot 7. And a man read out H. Heidelberg 1974, running condition unknown. And I raised my card. A dealer from Louisville wanted it for parts. He took me to 2,000 to 3 in that bored voice dealers use, and I just kept my card up because he was bidding on iron and I was bidding on Saturday mornings, and those markets never clear at the same price. At 4,200 he shrugged and quit. The hammer came down on wood. One clean knock and the auctioneer said, "Sold the lady in front." And Dale made a sound in his chest he denied to this day. I wrote the check against the hood of my truck with my grandfather's pen, and my hand did not shake. When I looked up, my father was standing by the press. He put his palm flat on the frame exactly where I always put mine. I never taught him that. Maybe it's the only thing in this story that's genetic. And he said quietly, "Not selling anything. Earl would have hired you before he ever hired me." I folded the receipt into my pocket. "I never made a single call, Dad," I said. "But I'm glad you finally did." We stood there together, one hand each on the cold machine, while men in canvas coats hauled the rest of it out into the daylight, and neither of us was ashamed, and that was new. It's May of 2026 now, and I'm going to tell you how it all sits because you've earned the ending. The H. Heidelberg runs. It took Dale 3 weeks and a parts hunt across 2 states to wake it up. He talked to that machine the whole time, low and patient, like gentling a spooked horse. And the first thing we ran on it was a wedding invitation. Thick cotton paper, real impression you can feel with your thumb. And when the bride's mother picked them up, she cried in my shop. The good kind of crying. The sign went up in April on a Sunday morning, 1 year almost to the day since the cake. I rented the lift myself, and Dale and Rosa steadied the ladder while I bolted my grandfather's oak sign, gold letters restored, every serif over my own front door on Wabash Avenue, Myers Printing. There is a satisfaction that lives in the shoulders. Did you know that? You feel it when you drive the last bolt into something true. Hartwell signed the full annual contract in May. Carl and me over spec sheets at my counter. Everything itemized, everything daylight. Rosa has dental now. She showed the whole shop her first crown like it was an engagement ring. And on Saturday mornings, more weeks than not, my parents come by. Mom brings tomato starts from my porch and rearranges my window display when she thinks I'm not looking. Dad drinks his coffee standing under the sign. He stays out there a while, some Saturdays. Once I watched him reach up and touch the bottom edge of the oak, just his fingertips, the way you'd touch a headstone. And then he came inside and asked what a man's got to do to get a refill around here. The town being the town tells it their own way. The Myers family moved the business downtown. The daughter runs it now. Isn't that nice? The likable version. The smooth story. My whole life that machine ate the truth and printed something prettier. Let it run. Because for the first time since 1969, the smooth story and the true one came off the press identical. Amir keeps the promises at that address. Says so right over the door in my grandfather's own hand. Sarah's thriving in Columbus, and I mean that without a single splinter in it. She builds brands for companies that hire her to build brands. The right tool finally in the right drawer. And she's good. And they pay her like it. We talk about once-a-month short calls, real ones. Last month she asked me to print her new business cards, letterpress, and mail them up. And I did. And she sent back a photo of them on her desk with no caption. Between sisters, that's a treaty. And my father found a new ending for his favorite story. I've heard him tell it at the diner, the bank. 1987, the borrowed tie. Except now it lands different. My smile bought us one extension, he tells them. My daughter's word bought us 50 years. Turns out only one of those was the family business. If there's one thing I'd set in type and hand to every quiet woman doing invisible work for people she loves, it's my grandfather's line with my own hard-won ending on it. You can't print a promise, you have to keep it. And if the people at your table only see you when you stop, then stop. Stand in the daylight and build where everyone can watch until your name over your own door says everything you spent years waiting for someone else to say. That's my story. The cake on the shop floor, the sign in the dumpster, the keys I slid back across my own counter. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Silent Empire Stories, where every betrayal has a consequence, every secret finds the light, and every ending delivers the justice you never saw coming. Turn on notifications, because the next story might be the one you'll never forget.